Now, there are calls indeed, as we've been speaking about, for Government of National Unity to keep its promises to exempt food items from value-added tax. Last year, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa did promise to look at expanding that food list. Hopefully this time we do have our connection right with Sandy Bukula, the CEO of the organization Operation Hunger. Sandy, hopefully we've got you right this time around. Let's just talk about perhaps your response very quickly to what was supposed to be a compromised budget put forward by the Finance Minister.
Well, Rabile, I think, we were very concerned because we were very hopeful when the 2% was being withdrawn. And we thought that the government is going to come back with a proposal that rather isn't looking at that, because this 0.5% rate is going to actually increase the food basket. And already the food basket is sitting at 5,313. Now, if we're adding this 0.5% on the just like on the average household food basket, it's an addition of about 334 rand 81 cent. Now, if we're going to expand and look at the VAT, the VAT zero rated food items, there isn't really much of a difference in terms of diversifying that basket, because what it essentially does is it only gives us a decrease of about 280 rand, which is not much to say. Now, I'd like to just think, I would like us to think about the low income households and the low income consumers. Now, you would think that the most prioritized, food items that people prioritize on a monthly basis is about 2,819. And this, from that 219, it's only just taken and removed about 122 rand. So this comes at a great concern, because we're hoping that, we're going to look at other innovative ways in which we're going to basically fit this bill of the country's revenue, instead of looking at the VAT, because what this does really is just escalates the already burdened, the low income consumers, and it also just exacerbates the food insecurity indicators that we already have in the country. Now, you would remember when we completed the Q4 Urabile last year, the number of stunted children was ranging up to about 28%, and we only had met about 2 out of the 10 global nutrition targets as a country. So with all of the other 8, we're still very much digressing, and this really was almost very concerning, and it was actually heartbreaking, because it also seems that we're only just looking at short-term intervention that actually have got long-term effects. So we are hoping that, with this with this talking stage and this proposal that have been put forward towards basically Treasure, that there's going to be a reconsideration, because remember, we've also just had a 12.7% increase in just electricity. Now, if you think about just the nutritional food basket, it's sitting at 6,000 rand. So how on earth are we going to be able to reverse the issues that we have so much within the malnutrition space? Because we have about 8 million children who are currently just impacted by malnutrition. So it's quite concerning.
Yeah. So what's the solution? You had spoken about innovative ways then to ultimately get this done and not necessarily raise VAT. What are the solutions you think?
I think if we were to look at, for example, areas of, like the high income tax, those specific people, we're looking at basically our reserves, and also just like the pension funds, things like those, but also just basically broadly, strengthening our capacity for international investment, and also just driving Brand South Africa forward so that more production can come in, because this response is not good, not only for low income consumers, but it's also not good, for the middle class as well as for the economy. So this decision, it's worrisome, because we also don't have an indication, and we're not giving an indication of how long are we looking periodically. Because, for example, if the country is thinking about a rescue measure, for short term, then we should be seeing the proposed long term, so that we can know that, for example, if we do accept per se, this one option. How long are we going to, and what kind of targets are we working towards? So it is quite, it's quite concerning, and it's worrisome because we just seem to be going back on a backlog. And you remember, Oratile, we've had such a huge issue in terms of climate change, in terms of the agri-processing. Our food inflation had gone up about 4%, conservatively over the past 3 years, and climate change was one of the biggest issues. And I think basically the agri-processing market also is quite open to be diversified. So we've got a couple of areas I think we could basically be looking at innovative ways to diversify so that we can make sure that we guarantee at least a safety net for all citizens of the country at the moment.
Sandy, you spoke about strengthening international investment for South Africa,
Yes.
ultimately, to try and get things right. One has to also say that in terms of arable land, we've got quite a bit when it comes to that. We're able to export a large number of our produce as well in this country, yet grains are still a significant thing that we actually import as well in this country. How do we become a lot more food secure, do you think? Is that going to be a form of international investment into that, or just us actually investing a little bit more, which means that you also have the Expropriation Act, which could be used for this manner as well? What are your thoughts?
Thank you for that. I think basically one of the most important touch points that you've touched on is looking at our trade exports values. And in that space, I think basically if we were to look at trading locally as well and increasing the scope of that, and driving more innovation towards and having more people producing in the country, and also just like a diverse amount, that would reduce basically the value astronomically, because we have submitted, in fact, under the food system, supply chain, areas where we could actually have optimization. And we're also in the science and technology, where we're looking at, for example, some of the modifications on some of the most staple foods to add more, for example, vitamins and nutrients in there, and thus reduce, of course, the cost of those. But also, if we're looking just not only on the grains, but we're looking at other commodities like, for example, chicken, and we're looking just at our market in China, I think there's a huge, potential to basically increase a little bit of what we are exporting, and also increase some of our tariffs to safeguard ourselves, because we've seen quite a huge, especially in the last quarter, we've seen quite a decrease in terms of that as well. I think it's about 3 to 7%. So there are already areas and structures and value chains that are already in place that we can actually look at the gaps and try and close those gaps.
Yeah, some of those gaps are going to be also something that you look at and you think it's because we haven't had the investment previously in the past in some of these areas, or we've neglected to aid them and push out a lot more funding towards some of these areas. How do we address the needs directly then of the poorest in the country and ensure that those households are effectively assisted? Because it's clear that there is, in some way, there's a need to get the funding. We need the money when it comes to the fiscus, by the looks of it. One could talk about efficiency then and how we actually use it. We could definitely talk about that. But if we're going to need more money, it's going to have to come from somewhere. And that also then becomes the issue. So maybe we try and prioritize different ways of helping the poorest in the country. How can we do that right?
I think basically if we're looking at the paradox of our food system at the moment, and basically what our value chains are in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the key players within the food industry right now, there are certainly, there's only a few percentage of those people that have access to those specific markets. But if we were to think about basically integrating in a real time, small and medium enterprises, and also just having more and diversifying small farmers and small agri-hubs that are currently in space but cannot participate in that big, in the big market. I think if we were to share the market segments so that to ensure that more people are becoming players. And also, I mean, if we're looking at our local financing, there are areas where we can actually prevent and redirect the allocations in the budget. I'll give you a simple example. When we're thinking about food security and malnutrition, we spend a whole lot of, of our budget within the health space, where we are dealing with the treatment thereof of non-communicable diseases, where we are dispersing, of course, like, free medication within the local clinics. But if we were to spend, more on the preventative methods in nutrition care, thus we wouldn't have, such a huge balance of people that we are requiring to treat, but we'll actually have preventative measures, because preventative measures do qualify much more cheaper than actually having to treat the problem. And secondly, I think basically we've strengthened, our data and ourselves as a key player in terms of, the food security indexes as well as the malnutrition indexes, from both your physical indicators all the way to the overall food systems. And there was quite a huge engagement, with government in the previous year in terms of looking at the provincial ways in which the food systems can be emerged, because we do have quite a number of graduates and a kind of number of the beneficiaries who are sitting at our categories that actually do have the skills that just require, some sort of assets and resources in order for them to be able to participate formally onto the infrastructure. So the adoptions of those kind of directions don't require for us to go elsewhere, but we already have the know-how. So I think basically all of that together does basically give a couple of,
a couple of solutions for us to be able to push forward
without even needing to go, to go international. And I'll just touch on basically
Sandy, unfortunately, I have to go to a break. I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to leave it there. But look, it's a growing discussion, right? And one that I think we need to delve into a lot deeper. And perhaps that's the conversation around the innovative solutions in moving just beyond that, and how exactly we aid those that are in South Africa, whether it be the middle class or not. It doesn't matter. So Sandy, I appreciate the time this afternoon. Sandy Bukula, the CEO of Operation Hunger.